The Korean War is often called the Forgotten War. But here's the thing, it never actually ended. From 1950 to 1953, the Korean Peninsula became one of the first major battlegrounds of the Cold War. Millions died, borders were frozen in place, and more than 70 years later, North and South Korea are technically still at war. So how did this happen? Let's break it down. How Korea got divided. To understand the Korean War, we have to go back to the end of World War II. Until 1945, Korea was under Japanese colonial rule. When Japan surrendered, the Allies had to decide what to do with the peninsula, and quickly. So almost casually, Korea was split in two at the 38th parallel. The Soviet Union occupied the north, and the United States occupied the south. Welcome to episode 4, the DMZ. I'm Mike Murphy. This is the Mike Murphy podcast, and I thank you for listening and tuning in. And wanted to go a little bit divert, I guess I could say, from, we talked about me going to basic training and AIT, my advanced individual training down at Fort Rucker. And next in line was officer candidate school, but I'm going to put that on hold. I'm going to be gone out of the country for a while. And so I thought, you know what? I took a 3-week trip over to South Korea back in 2015, about 10, 11 years ago. And I thought I'd show you a little bit of my experience and tell you about my experience in South Korea and the opportunity that I received, that I took to go up to the DMZ and see what it was all about. And it was fascinating. So talking about the war, the Soviet Union occupied the North. After World War II, the United States occupied the South. War broke out on June 25th of 1950 when tensions exploded. The North Koreans crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea, and then all hell broke loose. The attack was fast and overwhelming. South Korea and the U.S. forces were pushed into a small corner of the peninsula known as the Pusan perimeter, and the United States responded immediately, but not alone. And so the United Nations went in, and it became a dramatic turning point. In September of 1950, General Douglas MacArthur launched a bold amphibious assault at Incheon, far behind enemy lines, and it worked. And we were able to push back the North Koreans, and the Chinese invaded. And fearing a hostile force on its border, China sent hundreds of thousands of troops into Korea. Their counterattack shocked the UN forces and pushed them back south once again. And by 1951, the war settled into a bloody stalemate with front lines hovering close to where the war had begun. The forgotten stalemate actually happened, throughout the years from 1951 to basically 1953. A lot of trench warfare, constant shelling, heavy civilian casualties, and by the end, an estimated 3 million people were dead, most of them civilians. Cities were flattened, families were permanently divided, and yet no side could force a decisive win. So the armistice of 1953 began on July 27th, when the fighting stopped, but the war did not end, and to this day, it has not ended. An armistice, not a peace treaty, was signed, and a lot of people don't understand. So technically, North and South Korea are still at war. So the armistice was agreed to by North Korea, China, the United Nations Command, and South Korea refused to sign this. It established a ceasefire and a demilitarized zone, or the DMZ, which I'm going to show you some pictures of here shortly, and a heavy fortified buffer zone. And it was amazing, and I'll get to this when we drove up to the DMZ, just what you see. It's surreal. And why the Korean War still matters is that because no peace treaty was ever signed, the DMZ is now one of the most militarized borders on Earth. The conflict shaped Cold War strategy of the United States, China's role as a regional power, and North Korea's extreme militarization and isolation. They call it the Hermit Kingdom. And the Korean War didn't end with victory parades or treaties. It ended with a pause. So as of today, like I said, more than 70 years later, it's still at a pause. And as long as the armistice remains just that, a ceasefire, the Korean War remains one of history's most unfinished conflicts. So quite interesting there. So back in 2015, I actually was going to drill one weekend at Fort McCoy. I was up at, I think I was a battalion commander at the time, and I walked in and I saw my OCS commander, who was also my executive officer when I went to Iraq, Bill Barthen. He was filling out some paperwork or something online, and I asked him what he was doing, and he said he was filling out some information for the opportunity to go to Korea for a 3-week training exercise. And that caught my interest right away. Never been to the Far East, never been to Korea, never been to that side of the world. And I thought, I'm going to apply, which I did. And I was accepted to go. And so it was Bill, myself, and another gentleman. And we submitted our required information and did the required online training. And we were hoping the three of us, and we submitted in the training or in the paperwork that the three of us wanted to work together in the same area when we got over there. And I think we were told that wouldn't be a problem. So we left, I think it was February timeframe of 2015, I believe. And we left out of La Crosse, Bill and I did. We made our flight in Minneapolis and then flew out to Seattle. Barely made that flight. All the connections were very tight. And then it was a 12-hour flight from Seattle over the top of the Earth base, basically, and over to landing in Seoul, South Korea. And when we arrived in the military fashion that is not surprising, they weren't tracking us. They didn't know we were coming for some reason. So they had, a reception team at the airport, and Bill and I and this other officer checked in, and they had no clue what to do with us. And after waiting around for a while, they loaded us into a vehicle and took us into where we were going to be staying. And to my surprise, being a lieutenant colonel, I expected to be in, hotel, hopefully, and have a nice bed and shower. But that wasn't to be. We were in a tent city on those old Army cots, and had a footlocker at the end of the cot, and a sleeping bag and a pillow, and you tucked your stuff underneath the cot, and that was your home for the next 3 weeks. And I wasn't happy about the accommodations being a lieutenant colonel, and even the other guys. I think Bill was a captain at the time, and it just wasn't suitable to what we should have as officers, or for anybody, as for that fact, because we were working around the clock, 3 different shifts. So you'd have people coming into the tent at all hours of the night and day while you were trying to sleep. But that's where we were stuck for the next 3 weeks, or at least we thought we would be. And keep that in mind, because it's going to come up later in something that happened to me during the exercise. So we get there, we get to our tent, we settle in. The next morning we get up, we see that there's a water buffalo for our water needs. A water buffalo is basically a trailer with a big holding tank on it with potable water, so we could use that for drinking and such. There was a nasty bathroom with a shower where we would shower. It was packed with people every morning. And we found where we would eat, and so on and so forth, and just trying to get adjusted to what it was going to be like in Seoul. And we basically had a couple of days, Saturday and Sunday, where, again, we really didn't know what was going to happen to us because they weren't tracking us and didn't assign us where to be. But on Monday, we were finally approached or called in, and we were told that I was going to be working at a facility outside of Seoul. The other captain, I'm not sure, I can't remember his name, but he stayed somewhere in the area, but I never saw him. And Bill would clear down in the southern part of South Korea and was working down there. I think he took a train and left. And so the three of us, we were hoping to work together. And the next thing you know, everyone's off on their own. So, like I said, I was working at a facility just outside of the city, and it's a classified facility inside of a mountain, and quite a unique place. And the war game was basically preparing if the North would attack South Korea. And I was working in a section called the Strategic Communications, and what we would do there is that any communications that the higher ranking officers, like the generals, the 3 and 4 stars, would need, my section would write it for them, and to make sure didn't offend any countries because you're working with a lot of countries. We wanted to make sure that everything was written appropriately and that the general would approve, and obviously getting any point that he or she needed to make across in a precise, concise way. My day, basically, I would get up about 7:30-ish, go up for breakfast, and, my mornings were kind of slow because I was working a second shift at the time, and I would not go to the showers till about 10 or 10:30 because the first shift would be gone at that point, and then there wouldn't be too many in the bathroom shower area, so you were able to get a shower. It was less crowded. And I would change. I would walk up to lunch a little bit later, and then over the hill. I had to walk, I don't know, probably a mile each day. I would go up to a place called Dragon Hill, and it was a hotel that can be utilized by military people. And I was able to get Wi-Fi in there, and that's when I would catch up on emails, and I was able to post on Facebook, talk to people back home, talk to my family, and then I was also working on War College at the time. And I would work up there for, I don't know, till noon, 1 o'clock or so, and then I would complete the walk to the other side of the hill and catch a bus. And the bus was about a half-hour, 40-minute ride out to the mountain complex where I was working. I'd go inside, check in. You had to be, approved to go through. You'd have to go through security, and then I would start work around 2:30, 3 o'clock, 2:30, I guess. And then at 3 o'clock, I would head to a meeting, and then, work in the area that we were assigned to work until 10:30 at night. And then it would take me a while to get out of the complex, and then I would have to catch a bus, and I would get back to, my billets. I always had the bus let me off the stop prior to where my tent and cot were located. I got off the stop prior to that just so I could walk and get some exercise and, look at the beauty of the city as I was walking back to Tent City. And I would get to bed probably around, I don't know, midnight or so, and then start back over at 7:30 the next morning. And again, working second shift. So you remember, I wasn't too happy about having to live in a tent and on a cot for the next 3 weeks. And something crazy happened during the middle weekend. So the exercise kicks off. We get to, I think it was a Thursday, kind of the middle of the first week and a half or whatever. And they called an index right about the time I was hopping on the bus to head out to do my shift. Now, an index means that the exercise is ending, it's pausing. They usually do like an after action, see what they can do better, what they need to do next, reset everything so they can start the next part of the exercise. So it was going to be an index for a couple of days. So I'm on the bus, get on the bus right when they're calling this index. And when we arrive at the mountain complex where I would get off the bus, I saw tons of people coming out of the facility. And so I got off the bus and I walked up to the entrance, and the guard there said I wouldn't go in. They're clearing all the rooms and it would just be confusing. You might get lost in the shuffle. Everyone's leaving. I would recommend hopping back on the bus and heading back to Tent City. So I did that. I did not go inside the facility because they were emptying it out, and I was told not to go in. And so I get back to my tent and I link up with a couple of guys a few guys that were heading downtown. We were going to get something to eat, and I'll post some pictures of our meal. And we walked around town, and there was a curfew, so we were probably, I think curfew was midnight. We were probably back by 11 o'clock or so. Well, I get to my bunk, and there's a note on my bunk to call the colonel that was in charge of me in my section. I was to call him the next morning. And so I went to bed. And I got up the next morning and I called him, and he was very stern with me, very upset with me because I hadn't checked in during index the day prior. And you remember I wasn't too happy about having to stay in Tent City, and I had expressed that to a couple people. Now, here's the kicker. So when I didn't show up the day prior and they didn't have accountability of me, they called the CQ, the people, the two young soldiers that are in charge of like answering the phone and getting messages to people. They called those two that were on duty in our Tent City area. They had the wrong people sleeping in the wrong beds. That's how they kept accountability of everyone, but they had it wrong. So when the colonel's staff called these two young soldiers, and they said, "We are looking for Lieutenant Colonel Murphy. Can you find him?" They looked on their sheet, which told where everyone was sleeping, and I wasn't listed anywhere because they had screwed it up. So they told the colonel and his staff that I wasn't there. And so the colonel had his staff calling all over the city, the hotels all over Seoul, South Korea, to find out where I was. So I was, in their mind, technically AWOL, absent without leave. They couldn't find me. They had no accountability of me. But again, I was where I was supposed to be, but the staff did not have the beds correctly labeled and who was sleeping where. So I call him. He's very stern with me. He wants me to report to his office. I asked him if I had to be in uniform, and he said yes. So I changed. I walked over the hill, found his office, and he chewed my ass and basically said that, I wasn't, utilizing, or I didn't have the responsibility of a lieutenant colonel because of accountability and so on and so forth. And so I was pretty upset with him. He was upset with me. Obviously I didn't say anything to him. I just had to take it and suck it up. And I went out and sat with the guy that I normally worked with that the day prior had been calling all over the city looking for me, and he didn't give a shit. He's like, it's not a big deal. It was just a mistake, confusion, so on and so forth. And I told the colonel what happened, that I was in my tent area. I was, they had the wrong names with the wrong cots. Yes, I was downtown having supper, but I did not leave the area. And so, he was ticked off at me, but that pretty much ended that escapade. But it ticked me off because when I got back, I had to do an after action report. And one thing I reported on, and I told the colonel in my report, is if your expectation during an index, during a pause, is for soldiers to somehow link up with the staff for accountability, you need to have that in your standing operating procedures. You need to have that spelled out in policy so we know what to do. I'm new to this country. I'm new to this process. And yeah, maybe I should have, checked in somewhere, but where? I had no clue. It should be a no-brainer of who, what, when, where, and why. And a simple policy would have helped me to know what I needed to do during index and who I should report to make sure they had accountability of me. So I wrote that in my after-action report when I was back in the States and sent it in. And surprisingly, he responded and said, "You're right." And so I thought, it's pretty cool. At least he recognizes that a policy is needed, so people like me that are coming into the country, no matter what rank you are, know what to do. You know what the expectations are, and you know what the policies are. So anyway, we got that solved, and I continued with my 3 weeks, and it was interesting, a very interesting place to work. I can't get into the specifics of what was inside this mountain complex, but use your imagination, and it was pretty amazing what they do inside of this place in preparation for an attack on their country from the north or from anywhere. So that basically wraps up my 3 weeks there, but I want to talk to you about the middle weekend during that index when I was off. And I was able to take a morale wellness, and it's called an MWR trip, basically a trip up to the demilitarized zone, the DMZ. And it was interesting. We left Seoul, and as we were traveling along the river heading up towards the DMZ, the concertina wire is lining the river. They want to keep people out, and we get up to the first tunnel system, and I want to get into some specifics on these tunnels. They have tunnels that the North Koreans have dug towards the south, and it's very interesting that the tunnel we got to go to was one of 3, and they're called infiltration tunnels. They're open to tourists. We had to wear helmets. I wasn't supposed to take a picture, but I'm going to post one here. I did take one, and I'm going to post it here on the podcast. And we were able to go down into this tunnel, and these things are so cool. They were built, let me get back here to some information. They were secret underground tunnels dug by the North Koreans beneath the DMZ. And the intention of these tunnels was to move troops, weapons, and equipment into South Korea without being detected. 4 tunnels have been officially discovered. The first one was discovered in 74, then 1975. These are large enough to move thousands of troops per hour, so these are very large tunnels. The third tunnel was found in 78, and the fourth one in 1990, which had reinforced concrete. So you can just imagine what, to do these and to build these in secrecy. Again, their primary goal was rapid surprise invasion, to move an entire infantry division into South Korea, bypass heavily fortified surface defenses, enable lightning attacks on Seoul, and to allow 10,000 to 30,000 troops per hour to pass through. So imagine this, these tunnels, 10,000 to 30,000 troops per hour. It's debated whether they're still a threat. I'm sure they're looking continuously for more tunnels. And these things, the tunnels demonstrated North Korea's willingness to plan covert attacks and increased distrust between the two countries already. The third tunnel was the one we got to visit. We had to wear helmets, like I said, and you walk through a section of the tunnel. It's part of the DMZ tour that I went on, and it's cramped, and it's very real. You go down these steps, and it's just amazing to see how these were built and what they would be utilized for. It's very eerie because, when you go to historical places like this, most times, the war is over and things are settled and you're seeing something from World War II or World War I or whatever. Well, we were in tunnels that were a part of a war between two countries that hasn't been settled, and to this day hasn't been settled. So to be in those tunnels, you're like thinking, holy cow, these, they were found, but I'm sure there's others that haven't been found. And it's just eerie that this war is technically still on and that we were in a part of these tunnels. So after that, we got to go up we drove in a bus up to the DMZ, and it was very interesting to see everything that's up at the demilitarized zone. There's a number of soldiers working up there, and the facilities are unique to say the least. They're always on guard. The border is heavily fortified. A number of soldiers. Before we went out into, and I'll put a picture up, the two blue buildings that you can go into where when countries meet with North Korea, this is the place where they meet. Before we went out there, we had to sign a piece of paper saying we weren't going to go and defect into North Korea. Now think about that. Why would we defect from a free country into a communist control, black, hermit kingdom type of country? But at that time, when I was there in 2015, I believe they told us like 140 some people, between 140 and 150 people had defected from the south to the north. It sounds crazy, but it happened. And so we had to sign a piece of paperwork saying that we weren't going to do that. And then we were able to go out into the blue buildings. I'm going to post a picture of these, and it's heavily guarded. We got to see the actual cement area, that is the actual, border between north and south. I'm going to post a picture. You're going to see 2 guards, and then they're facing North Korea. And then the next picture I post, you're going to see, if you zoom in, and I'll try to see if I can crop the picture well enough, you're going to see a North Korean guard at the top of the steps staring back at them. And they called him Bob. And the reason they called him Bob is because there's a pillar, and he would bob back and forth between that. He would hide behind it and then come out and watch, and then he'd hide behind it and come out and watch, and so on and so forth. He's in a all brown jacket and uniform, so hopefully I can zoom in so you can see him. So constant on guard, constant troops in that area. If you go online, you can see some video of an actual, I believe it was a soldier that was driving a vehicle and actually escaped into South Korea. And during the escape, he got shot and had to lay there for quite a while before the South Koreans got to him, and I think we're able to pull him to safety. But a lot of history. There's a propaganda village just across the border. You can see the huge flag flying, the North Korean flag, and there's music blasting, and it's a fake city. And they're blasting messages about how great it is to live in North Korea and that, we are the aggressor, the South Koreans are the aggressor. The other place we got to visit was, that I believe the pronunciation is Dorasan Train Station, and I'll post some pictures of this too. This was a train station built near the DMZ, or right next to the DMZ, and it was basically going to link South Korea with North Korea. There was a period where relations were getting better between the two countries, and so this train was going to be allowed, and I'll post a map. It was supposed to be allowed to go from the South Korean peninsula through North Korea and all the way across, I believe, over to to Russia or somewhere. I'll post the map online, and you can see where that train was supposed to go. And the train, to my knowledge, to this day, but at least back in 2015 when we were there, had never ran because there was an incident, there was a shooting at the DMZ, and relations went to hell in a handbag. So this train station, this beautiful train station, you'll see the train in the picture, is sitting there and not being utilized. And again, just amazing. But I would challenge anyone or ask anyone just to go in and go on YouTube and just type in the DMZ. Like I said, I'm going to post some pictures and some things that I saw up there. It's just so surreal to be right at the border, and you're seeing one of the biggest enemies of the United States, the United Nations, and you're right there looking right at them. And when I was inside the blue building, you actually can walk to the opposite end, and you are technically in North Korea. So we had a little glitch in the video, and what I was saying is when we were in the blue buildings on the DMZ, I was able to cross that cement area technically inside the building and was standing in North Korea. So I can say that all the countries I've visited, I've actually been in South and North Korea. So it was very interesting. So that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to tell you about. Again, very interesting country. I would love to go to North Korea someday. I know you can tour, but I don't think I would ever take the chance of something happening up there. But again, very fortunate to be able to go to Korea and work for 3 weeks and to actually take a trip up to the DMZ and look into the Hermit Kingdom and see North Korea and get a little taste of what it was all about. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Like I said, I'm taking a break for a little bit. I'm going to be out of the country, but I'll resume things when I get back and get back on track with the next part of my military career when I went to officers' school. So I appreciate you tuning in, and please like and subscribe, and hopefully we can just keep growing my channel, and I hope that you are enjoying these podcasts. I know I like doing them, but I get a little frustrated at times with the editing because things like this go wrong, but hopefully I can splice this in and complete this section of the recording. So again, thanks, and I appreciate it, and hope you have a great day.